Hello, I'm Lois Dixon Myers, and I'm making this YouTube because I'm terribly upset. The other day I heard on the news that the newly appointed Secretary of Energy by President Obama in his cabinet came out and made a rash statement that he believed that the price of gasoline in America should be the same as the price of gasoline in Europe. That is ridiculous because in Great Britain, the price of gasoline is $9.45 a gallon or upwards. Why in the world would President Obama appoint someone like that to make a statement that he wanted to increase our price of gasoline in America, our oil prices? That is absolutely undermining to the whole economy in the United States. I am a particularly strong advocate of building back up our U.S. oil supplies because I ran for U.S. Congress last year, 2012, as a candidate who wanted to go to Congress to shed the light on the truth of how it is that we got into our economic slump, which I believe that's here today, which I believe is because of our ruination of our U.S. oil supplies. Let me give you a little bit of history. As I go back to 1980, I printed out two charts, and one of the charts is the information from the U.S. Department of Energy Information Administration. As you can see, from 1980 or thereabouts, there has been a drastic downward slump in the supplies of oil in America. There's a slight uptick in 2012 here, but not much. The other information is the chart from the Texas Railroad Commission, which grants drilling permits in Texas, so they have the statistics. And as you can see, the corresponding information is that from about 1980 downward, beyond, there has been a downward slump in oil supplies in Texas. The truth is that Jimmy Carter, president in 1980, pushed through Congress the devastating Windfall Profits Tax, which really killed the oil industry in America. Most people don't know that back in those days, the small independent oil companies drilled 80 to 90% of our oil, and it was just the reverse for the major oil companies. They drill 80% overseas, and they predominantly still produce and explore for oil overseas. But going back to 1980, when this tax was passed through Congress, it was so devastating on the small independent oil companies who could not sustain such a high tax that by 2.5 years or thereabouts, most of the U.S. oil companies, about 80 to 90% of the small independent oil companies, were dead in the water. So that by 1983, the U.S. was dependent, 85% dependent on OPEC or foreign oil that doesn't get taxed a dime. The truth is that that tax pushed American investment capital overseas. That meant our oil was pushed overseas. Our dependence of oil was coming in from overseas. We had our major oil companies drilling overseas. Everything went overseas, and it pulled the rug out from the bottom, the oil that was produced in America, which is the foundation of our whole U.S. economy. All of our businesses, in one way or another, are based on oil. It is the basis of our energy, our electricity, our source of energy. Now, it might be that you don't like that, but the fact is that's the way it is. And as we can increase our oil supplies, we will get our prices down by law of supply and demand the price of oil will fall down. We can forget about OPEC, tell them to take a flying leap, forget about all these troubles in the Middle East, and become a self-sustaining nation with our oil. And as we do that, we will build up our businesses in America. Our economy will start to turn around because homes as well as businesses will benefit by the reduced savings in energy costs. And as we build our economy back up, perhaps we can spend more money in technology to develop alternative sources of energy like solar and clean air energy. But right now the fact is you can't get on an airplane, you can't get in your car unless you have a good supply of oil or natural gas. That's just the way it is in Rome, and when in Rome you have to do as the Romans do. Another fact that most Americans do not realize is that the value of the U.S. dollar is very closely tied to the price of the barrel of oil. It's an inverse proportion. When one is up, the other is down. So, if we could build up our supplies of oil, and the price of oil would therefore fall by law of supply and demand, the price of the value of the U.S. dollar will rise. But as it is now, with the price of oil being so high and predicted to even rise higher, the value of the U.S. dollar is down. And that is why Bernanke has had to be printing out all of these worthless paper greenback dollars. It is extremely critical that we will build back up our oil supplies, get the price of oil down again, and that will help to increase the value of the U.S. dollar. Moreover, the U.S. dollar is at risk because it is the standard currency in which oil is bought and sold all around the world. Vast reserves of U.S. dollars are held by all of the central banks around the world. But there is a threat and a rumor that they might dump all of the U.S. dollars if they become worthless. If they become any lower, they will become worthless. Because they don't want to be holding a lot of worthless dollars. And nations around the world, other nations, are beginning to sell and trade oil in their own currencies and saying, forget about the U.S. dollar. When that happens, if it continues and the central banks around the world flood the market with all these worthless U.S. dollars, it's going to hit Wall Street and it is going to crash. We will have a bigger depression in the United States than we ever saw before back in the late 20s and early 30s. It is that critical. That is what is at stake. This is why I wanted to go to Congress, shed the light to both sides of the aisle, both Democrats and Republicans, get on board with this to save America. Because America's economy is at great risk. It is a false economy in Wall Street. That's why they're having to print out the paper dollars, the U.S. Treasury, Bernanke and Obama and so forth, printing out more dollars. Otherwise, everything could just fall apart in America. They have to do that. They're forced to do that. Well, they feel that they are anyway. And what they should be doing is taking a very strong, proactive stance to jumpstarting all of these small independent oil companies that drill in America and build back up our supplies. Get the EPA and the taxes out of the way so we can become oil energy independent. That is what is absolutely essential for America's economy to come back and to again thrive, that will support a strong military as well. All of these cutbacks that we see in the military and every other program out there in the United States is a direct result of our not having enough oil supplies in America, and my two charts prove that. We have got to build back up our supplies at least to the 1980 level, and we're a long far cry from that, until to make us become a strong